All right, Catherine, what's our first question today?
Well, so hi, I'm Catherine. I'm a scientist with Odylia, for those of you I haven't met yet. And thank you all for joining and for sending some of your questions ahead of time. We have quite a few questions. So, but as Asha said, this is sort of an informal discussion. So please feel free to jump in or help us continue if you have questions sort of leading off of questions we already have. So with that,
real quick, I jumped over introducing yourself. Can you say your name and your position, and we'll go through Jenny and Heather as well real quick.
Sure. I am Catherine Postamont, and I am a scientist with Odylia.
Jenny?
Hello, I am Jenny. I am heading up the program management and operation efforts at Odylia.
And Heather?
I'm Heather Green, the Director of Development, which means fundraising for Odylia.
All right, thank you all.
Awesome. So we'll start out. One question we had was, what news do we have on manufacturing? And is there any updates on the preclinical plan?
Good question. So we, hopefully most of you saw our updates on, I think this first came out over social media. And I think we'll have further updates in the next few months, but we had our first round of manufacturing with Odylia Biosciences. So they are our partner for, and you'll sometimes hear the term CDMO, which is Contract Development Manufacturing Organization. So this is the group that will be manufacturing the vector for use in our final toxicology studies, as well as our clinical vector, which will be used in clinical trials. So we initiated that work late last year. The first piece of data coming through a few months ago was really exciting. And that initial step is really just looking at how well, without any optimization, how well the vector produces. And so we look at something called yield and looked at the measurement of yield, and the yield was really good for this vector. And this is specifically the INC80 RPGRIP1 vector. And there's a number of other vectors in the field that are used. This one, the yield is looking to be comparable to some of the higher producing vectors. So all that to be said, the initial data looks really good, really encouraging. We have further steps. It's a long, complicated thing to get to the final vector that we end up using. But the first initial steps are really encouraging, and we're excited to see that. And actually, so is Odylia. So that's, I think, great news. Catherine and Jenny, you guys recently were at the American Society for Gene and Cell Therapy conference, and I think presented on this. Do you want to add anything?
Sure. I'll say that, we got really excited responses from other people in the field, maybe not necessarily people who were super familiar with our program, but they saw, they had heard about INC80, which is our vector, and they were really excited to see how well it was doing in the manufacturing so far, because it is sort of newer or hasn't been used as much. People weren't sure how it would do. So there was a lot of excitement around that, I will say.
Yeah, and then we also met with Odylia Biosciences while we were there, and they're very excited to be working on this program and to be helping us manufacture the INC80 vector. So I think we have a really good partnership with them.
All right. Any questions? Feel free to jump in if you have any follow-up questions about manufacturing.
If not, the next sort of question and follow-up to that was timelines and how, manufacturing and the way things are going now, how that affects timelines. So maybe Jenny, do you want to show what we're working on in terms of timelines at the moment?
All right. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So these are the current timelines for the RPGRIP1 program. The red dotted line is where we are currently at. And as Ashley has mentioned, we have started the manufacturing process, and we are also in the middle of preparing our briefing book. This is the initial package that we will be sending over to the regulatory bodies to get their feedback on our preclinical studies, our manufacturing processes, and our clinical plan. So that is this gray bar right here. And the green stars represent very exciting regulatory milestones and feedback from the regulatory body on all of those 3 sections and what they think about our plan once we propose it to them. Once we complete the manufacturing up here in the light blue bar, that will be able to move into our safety study down here in the dark blue. You see this gray line going from the light blue to the dark blue. This is our final safety study that we will perform in 2024, pending funding. And once we have those results and analyze the data, we can compile all of those final plans into another regulatory document. It's called the IND submission, and we submit that off to the regulatory body, and they essentially approve our plan to move into a first-in-human clinical trial, or they come back and say, no, we need more information. You need to do these things before we can approve the first-in-human clinical trial. So it's a little bit of a gatekeeper there. And then in the green, all the way at the bottom, you will see our clinical plans. We have been engaging with the clinical advisory board for, is it maybe 2 years now, to help us develop our clinical synopsis that we will present to the regulatory body. And then we also began engaging the patient advisory board last fall, and they have been absolutely incredible in helping us work through our clinical trial plans. So that will continue to be ongoing all the way through our regulatory submissions and into clinical trial as well. So the plan here, pending funding, assuming there are no hiccups along our regulatory pathway, the goal would be to be in a first-in-human clinical trial in the second half of 2025.
So we're running the program as quickly as possible. And as Jenny mentioned, the goal is to be in clinical trials by 2025. Some of the key milestones that you'll see come up along this timeline really are around manufacturing, which is underway. We hope that continues smoothly. We're encouraged by the initial set of data, but sometimes things can shift as you learn more about the vector. It's a biologically based process, so it's not always straightforward, but we're encouraged by the initial data. And then these regulatory interactions with the FDA. So starting with the pre-IND meeting, we're hoping to do that before the end of the year. So right now we're in a heavy phase of drafting documentation for the FDA. And then it'll be toxicology studies, hopefully next year. And then final production of that clinical vector, and then moving into that final interaction with the FDA. So this is an aggressive timeline. We'll keep things moving as quickly as possible, but look for those key updates, which we hope to have along the way. All right. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions sort of going off of that? It's kind of a lot of information all at once, but we can also pop back to that if questions come up as we keep talking. Okay, from my list, we're kind of getting into some more sciencey questions. So one of the questions that was asked was, to qualify for gene therapy, will photoreceptors need to be present? So this is a question really about the clinical trial, the first-in-human trial. And this is, obviously we're working on that plan with our patient advisory board, the clinical advisory board. We come up with a plan, we go to the FDA, and then they'll have feedback and a lot of response to that. So there's a number of iterations that will happen, but most likely there will need to be, photoreceptors present in order to be eligible for the gene therapy. And that's, usually measured by clinicians. Sort of going off of that, a question was about kind of how photoreceptors work. It sounds like somebody had an ERG and it didn't show any function. However, this person can distinguish colors. So there was a little confusion about that. So, I'm not, I'm not totally sure. I would need a little bit more information, but my first thought when hearing that question was that potentially the ERG itself wasn't maybe sensitive enough to pick up the function of the photoreceptors, or maybe the ERG was just looking at rod, looking at the functioning of rods. But from what I would think is that the ERG maybe just wasn't sensitive enough, or for whatever reason it wasn't picking up that functioning. If that person is able to see colors, you need photoreceptors in order to see color. That's how we see. So
yeah, and Catherine, maybe just to bring those two thoughts together, I'll jump in here, because the primary measure to see if you have any photoreceptors would be through OCT, and the measuring of your photoreceptor function is through ERG, and that ERG measures the output of cones and rods, and there's different protocols for how a doctor would assess cone versus rod function. There's a lot of difference in how they can run even within that cone specific protocol or rod specific protocol. They can change the dimness of the light or how things kind of flash or appear. So there's a lot of difference in sometimes how those studies are run. And I know my assumption, I think Catherine, you hit it spot on, is that sometimes when you're getting that feedback from the doctor, they're not always clarifying that level of detail. So they might have been talking about rod, whereas cones really assess the color differentiation. And so maybe they weren't really looking at cone ERG, or there's a lack of sensitivity. So some of that level of complexity, I know, or I'd assume, isn't always spelled out when you're in those visits and afterwards. That might be part of the confusion there.
Another question that we get sometimes too is like, are there other symptoms associated with RPGRIP1 vision loss? So this person asked specifically about autism and how potentially RPGRIP1 mutations affect the brain. I guess what I would say to that is that there hasn't been a lot of research, unfortunately, on how RPGRIP1 mutations affect other organ systems other than the eye. It is present in what is called a ciliary body. So those are present in other types of cells throughout your body. That being said, it doesn't necessarily mean that that'll, have a negative or any other kind of effect on those cells. So I guess from the literature, there isn't a clear reason or belief that there are other symptoms associated with RPGRIP1 mutations in addition to the vision loss. That being said, each patient is different, and there could be. Just because they haven't seen it in the literature doesn't mean that there's not. Yeah, so that's what I would say on that. Ashley, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, we haven't seen anything specifically. I think some of the anecdotal comments we've gotten from the community over the past 2 or 3 years has been a few parents have commented on maybe speech delay. We've had this comment about maybe autism type presentation. There might have been a comment on kidney or GI function. So I don't think we're seeing a unified consensus. But sometimes it can take a few years, especially in rare disease, where one clinician will maybe only see one RPGRIP1 patient or two, and it's hard to build consensus if they're not seeing a lot of patients at once. But I wouldn't say from what we're seeing, there's anything that stands out. Sometimes you'll see speech delay or developmental delays when you have reduced function in one sense or the other. So auditory effects or maybe low vision loss will sometimes affect other developmental skills. Sometimes there will be delays. So nothing that we can see in the literature or from the community as a whole. But I think part of that is keeping an open conversation and dialogue across the community. Sometimes parents will be the first to notice that they're talking on Facebook and they keep seeing a symptom come up. So that's where we encourage you guys to talk to one another as well. All right. Next question.
All right, so the next question is getting a little bit more into the clinical trial itself. The first question is it possible to register a patient from Iran or another country outside of the US for a clinical trial? And so, you know, as Ashley and Jenny both talked about, we're not at the point of clinical trial yet, which means, you know, we're not actively recruiting yet. It also means that there haven't been decisions made yet on exactly where that clinical trial is going to take place. And that's an ongoing sort of discussion. You know, please, you know, if you are in the US and you haven't yet, we encourage you to register with My Retina Tracker with the Foundation for Fighting Blindness. The reason for that is that it's a sort of centralized registry, and that has the potential for us to be able to reach out to people on that registry who have RPGRIP1 mutations. In other countries, you know, please reach out to your clinician or your care provider, and they might have information on registries in your specific country or information on how that works. And then also on our end, you know, we love to be involved with the community and keep you guys informed on what's going on our end. So please feel free to, if you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. You know, we try to post updates pretty frequently, and obviously things like this to keep everybody in the loop. So if you are interested in potentially being a part of a clinical trial later on, those are some good ways to keep in touch with us.
The other thing we have on, and if there's interest in this, we can dig out the link. We have a one-pager on both RPGRIP1 and Odylia, and that might be a good resource to share with your physician. Because at some point, usually in the clinical trial process, if you're interested in enrolling, there is a transfer of files or an initial communication with your care provider. So it might be helpful to introduce your doctor to Odylia. Feel free, if they have questions, you can share our contact information with them. They can always reach out and we can answer questions about the RPGRIP1 gene therapy we're developing, clinical trial design, et cetera. But like Catherine said, we haven't settled on exactly what the clinical trial design will ultimately be. That will take some time once we get there, and we're happy to answer any questions you have about our current thinking. But once we get there, there'll be an open call for those to enroll who are interested. And you can be from outside the US. If it is in the US, that's most likely where we're focused on running the study now, is in the US. We don't have a site selected, but it may be dependent on funding. That's something we're also exploring, about whether there are funding opportunities in other countries that don't exist in the US. So we remain open to that possibility too.
Yes, okay, and then sort of going off of that, a little bit more details on the clinical trial. So as we've said before, we're hoping to, you know, maybe start a clinical trial in 2025 is sort of our goal, pending funding and all other things. But another question was, what will the potential age range be for a clinical trial? It's a good question, and it's something that we're working on. You know, as I said before, it's something that even if we have an idea of like the plan we would propose, you know, that goes through several iterations, both with our, you know, clinician advisors, as well as with the FDA themselves. They'll have an opinion on, you know, if a patient population of a certain age makes more sense than another age. There's a lot of things to consider when we're thinking about different populations, different age ranges, both in terms of just like consent, but also in terms of you know, who can do the testing. You know, if a patient needs to be able to sit still for a long period of time, that may, you know, push us into a certain type of age range, et cetera, things like that. So those are all things that we're taking into consideration. Ashley, do you have anything to add on that?
No, it's part of the tricky part about age ranges, and I've worked in a number of gene therapies that were pediatric, is there's early onset for much of the RPGRIP1 population, especially if you have an LCA diagnosis. So our hope is to get into younger children quickly. The FDA and many regulatory bodies prefer starting with older adults or older pediatric populations. So there's a lot of strategy we have to consider when we're making those plans. So that's something that as Catherine pointed to, and Jenny touched on the timelines, those key regulatory interactions with the FDA will give us feedback on their thinking. We have the opportunity in that initial interaction, we're hoping for later this year, to propose a clinical trial design, and they'll give us feedback on whether they agree with it, whether they have further questions. So that's going to be a shifting landscape for us. We're not going to know today exactly what the clinical trial will look like in 2 years, but we have ideas of how best to strategically think about that. And that's something with our advisors, both clinical and patient advisors, that we'll probably be working on over time. That being said, to one of the earlier questions, as a minimum, we'll need photoreceptors. Our vector targets replacement of RPGRIP1 in the photoreceptors. They don't need to necessarily be functional, but initial criteria will necessitate we have photoreceptors in our patients that we're treating.
Because sometimes it's thought that they might not be functional, but photoreceptors might still be present, right? Is that what you're talking about? And then sort of building off of that, we had a question from Anne, is if the trial takes place outside of the US, would the FDA still be involved?
Not likely. So what we're most likely going to run is a single trial site. That's common in rare disease, not so common with bigger, more common disorders. Usually you have a multi-site trial. We'll be trying to keep costs down, go through one site, which will be for both the surgery and follow-up. So in that case, we'd be interacting with, if it's in the UK, let's say that their FDA is called MHRA, or EMA in Europe. That being said, our initial interactions are going to be with the FDA for our pre-IND meeting. So our expectation is that we will be working within the US initially. You can have patients from outside the US flown in for US trials. But I think, and this goes to another question that we did see come through online. Maybe we could just read that real quick. Is that all right, Catherine? I can jump to the.
Yes. Yeah, go for it.
Have you contacted any overseas governments where a large percentage of residents are those with the RPGRIP1 gene? I've heard from my daughter's doctor that Saudi Arabia has the highest rate. So it's something that we're keeping an eye on, because funding is tough for this program. Being a rare disease and being where we are with funding, if there were opportunities for specific governments to essentially give out grants or kind of invest in the program because there's a significant number of patients in their population, that's something we consider. So we did have an introduction to a children's hospital in Dubai who had some interest in this area initially. And that's a sort of, if you have those connections with your local government, your local community, researchers, it doesn't necessarily have to be government, but potential folks who are potentially interested in seeing a treatment for this patient population, please put us in contact with them. We'll offer to make an introduction. We're always happy to talk to folks who are interested and explore different avenues for funding. We just want to ensure really that the program keeps moving forward. And clinical trials are not cheap. So we're looking at a few avenues there, some US based. I think we're open to ex-US, but we haven't quite hit on exactly a win yet. So let us know if you have ideas.
And actually sort of following up with that, if let's say a trial is done outside of the US, would that be open to Americans, or similar to how in the US patients could be flown in from other places? Is that similar in other countries, or?
Quite possibly. It depends on the regulatory body, again, what the regulations are, MHRA, EMA. Japan has a very active trial network, Australia. So none of these I know are ideal. We're talking about a very international community with folks both in and outside the US. I know that's not ideal. Our goal is to ensure we have funding for the program to continue moving forward and to get through clinical trials as quickly as possible to make these therapeutics available. So each regulatory body operates independently and differently from the FDA. So it all depends on what their regulations are. But our hope is that this ends up being open internationally, given the nature of rare disease. It'd be very hard to run a full clinical trial in one country. That's often a challenge to recruit enough patients. So a lot of this will be open-ended, I think, until it's really, I think, heavily dependent on funding at this point.
Great. And then sort of off of that too, are the standards similar across the different bodies, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's hard to say. There's different emphasis, and I'm not a regulatory, they call it regulatory scientists, people who really specialize in kind of the regulatory strategy, or people who are heavily involved as a career in just regulatory engagement. That's not my background. I've been involved in different interactions where I've also been involved in gene therapies that were partially in the US, partially outside of the US, all under FDA peer review, or who went completely outside the US and were interacting with EMA or MHRA. So they're all a little bit different. Sometimes there's a difference in maybe how they see the ability to work with a juvenile population versus an adult population. That seems to be a view that can differ. The time to kind of move through their different approval process, that can be different. They are really, really trying. There is a concerted effort to make communications and approvals in one system more fluid and flow through a bit more seamlessly to the next. So if something happens in the FDA world, making it so that there can be direct communication to maybe the EMA in parallel. So these don't have to be completely separate processes. We're not quite there yet, but there's a push to change that, how that works. It'll be, unfortunately, be a while, but at least I'm encouraged to see that that's shifting and there's an acknowledgement that things need to proceed differently.
Any other questions on that? We can also come back around. The next question we have is on kind of, which I touched on a little bit before, is how do we get in contact with Odylia about the gene therapy? So as I said before, if you haven't already, please sign up for our newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Also, if you have specific questions or want to, be put on a list of ours internally that, we know that, you would be interested in getting contacted about further developments in the RPGRIP1 Gene Therapy program, please email us at our info account. So that's info, info @odylia.org. Those are the best ways really to contact us. Let's see. So somebody asked, let's see, I heard clinical trials will start in 2025, and until that time, we need to keep in touch. I wonder, how can we apply to volunteer for clinical trials? I assume this question is about applying to be a part of a clinical trial, so that will happen later on, like in 2025, if that's when we're running the clinical trial. So that's when that will happen. We're always looking for volunteers in other ways too. So if you are looking to help out with this program, even before clinical trial, please reach out to us also. There's lots of ways for the community to get involved.
Catherine, I think this is something we were talking about internally, and it might be good to comment here. We don't have a clinical trial enrollment or interest form right now, but that's something that we can kind of look for in the future. I know there's a lot of folks asking about this specifically. I think in the meantime, Catherine said some of this, email us if you're interested. Also introduce us to your physician and doctor so they're aware of us. Jenny just put our contact email, info@odylia.org in the chat. So please have a look. That's info@odylia.org, O-R-G. You can sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media to get the latest. But I do think we're going to follow up with this group as well as the broader RPGRIP1 group to maybe, we're talking about this, how they're thinking about putting out a call for what interests you have specifically. Because right now the engagements through social media, newsletter, or email, maybe we put out a specific request if you want to be included on RPGRIP1 specific updates. So look for that down the road. We'll work on that and hopefully get that pushed out to you guys. So we have a more specific, I think, way to register your interest with us.
And I just dropped in the chat the link to the newsletter. So if anybody is not signed up for the newsletter, that's a good place to, you can click on there and sign up. And additionally, I made some notes of things we've talked about so far that I will send to, we'll email out to everybody who signed up for this Q&A. So we'll go ahead and send that to you. We'll send it out this week, so you have it, and that also will be has our website and everything on it, so that'll be a good resources as well.
Great, thanks, Heather.
So let's see, unless I missed one, I think we're good. So the next question is about Sony devices and them being out in the public and being shown for the visually impaired, and sort of questions on if those are useful or they're authentic or real, or what about them. Ashley, do you have any information?
I have to say, I don't know much about these. I looked them up and they're actually pretty cool. It looks like if I'm interpreting the question correctly, it looks like there's a camera that can be used. It projects an image directly onto the back of the retina for viewing. I think it at least initially started as a way for folks with vision loss or low vision or visual impairment to be able to use a camera and take pictures. I don't know much about them. It looks pretty exciting, I would say. So check that out. If you know more information, or if I'm not answering that question, it's not exactly what you intended, let us know. But I don't, unfortunately, I don't specifically know much about it beyond what I could Google before our meeting.
Okay, so our next, unless people have more questions, our next questions are kind of getting into fundraising and how that is going, and updates on that. So
Catherine, do we want to pause real quick and just give everyone one more chance? Does anyone have any questions about clinical trials or the science focus? And nothing else on info, right?
Right, so far.
Okay.
We can always pop back if more questions come up.
Yeah.
So Heather, how is fundraising going? You're muted.
It's going very well.
Sorry. It is, it's going slowly, I would say. We've to date raised, over the last couple of years, we've raised about $300,000, which is great. But the timeline that Jenny showed, the price tag to get there is probably about $2 million. So we have a good ways to go. And I think we're gaining momentum for sure. And some things that have happened since we had a meeting in February that was kind of like an update from us, but we got some ideas from folks at that meeting, and we wanted to share some of those with y'all today too. But I would say to specifically answer that question, we still need to raise just about $2 million to complete the manufacturing, complete the safety studies, get all of that done. And it seems like a really big number, but I really feel like at the rate we're going, it's doable. We just need to get the word out a little bit more and raise awareness across a lot of the community to reach that goal. But one of the things, there's a family, actually a parent, and then all of his friends in London, and they have started doing fundraisers, charity soccer matches, they call them football, and bike rides where they're collecting donations and things like that. And those are adding up to be, several $1,000s. And so it's just, he and his friends and family are collecting those donations to and sponsoring to sponsor the people who are participating in the bike rides or the runs or the marathons. Actually, one of the guys is going to run, I think it's a marathon. I know he's running a race blindfolded to try to not only raise money, but raise awareness. Makes me very nervous, but I think it will definitely raise awareness for the people at the race and leading up to that. And so one thing that we've done I might be jumping ahead in one of the other questions, but we've set up a online software, I guess, to be able to collect donations in a variety of ways. We used to only do credit cards, and we got a lot of feedback from the community that people wanted options for PayPal or Venmo or bank transfers or other things other than just credit cards. So we did set up a software, a website that we can collect funds in those different methods. And you can, and we're still working on specifically foreign currency. You can make the gift and it'll come out of your account if you have a different currency than US dollars. But when you're on the website, it just shows up as US dollars, but it comes out of your account in your native currency. And it's
real quick, sorry, do you want me to show this while you're talking through it?
yes.
Is that helpful? I can go ahead and do that.
This page is called every.org is the software that we're using. And it also has a place where if you or your family or some friends that you have want to set up a fundraising page.
Let me try that one. Sorry.
You can do that. So the gentleman who did this in okay, so this is yes, thank you. This is all of the different ways that you can donate. So it's a lot easier if someone wants to just do Venmo or PayPal and they don't want to do a credit card, especially, this helps with that. And it comes back to Odylia, and you can on here also designate what it's for. So you can say it's for RPGRIP1. You can say it's for your specific patient or something like that if you want to do that.
Is that weird? Is this with a private note?
You can either add the note, or there is another public section as well.
Okay.
I follow up with the people who make the gifts because I want to make sure that we're putting the money where folks want it. And so if it isn't designated, I would follow up with whoever donated to make sure that it was for RPGRIP1 or not. But if you go, okay, so right there. So this Freya is the daughter of the person I mentioned, Gavin, who's doing all these different fundraisers in the UK. And so he set up this page that he sends to his friends, and they donate in honor of his daughter. So anybody can set up a page here. It just doesn't have to be Gavin. I can set it up for you if you want. You can set it up yourself. So this is another way to kind of help expand the fundraising, because you could email this out to your contacts or share it on social media, or however you communicate with folks, and it would help raise money. You don't have to worry about being able to either take cash or checks or credit cards or anything like that. It can all be done here. And the nice thing is, like I said, it can be PayPal, Venmo, however people make donations. The other thing that we can do, and I don't know if you have this handy, Ashley, is make a one-page flyer for you to send out that has a QR code on it that would also come back to the page to make a donation. So we've in the last couple of months, we've tried to come up with some resources based on what we heard from folks that would be helpful. So that's another thing, is that just a one-page flyer like this. And the QR code, this one goes to that page you just saw, but we could make a QR code for your family's page or another page, put your own photo in, and we're happy to do that if that would help you in your fundraising and awareness raising efforts. it's important to obviously to do the fundraising, but it isn't just asking people for money. It's asking people who they know who might be interested in supporting Odylia. You know, it's expanding that network. So this is another thing that we can do.
We had a question, is this sort of like a GoFundMe page, or how is that different from GoFundMe?
It is like GoFundMe, except it is directly to Odylia. It doesn't go through GoFundMe first, doesn't go through Facebook first, it doesn't go through any of the other
Recording in progress.
It doesn't go through any of the other, I don't know what you call those outlets before. It just comes straight to Odylia. So that it makes it a little bit more seamless and faster. And so also it lets me be able to email directly with people who make donations to make sure that, well, first off, we want to thank them, but we want to make sure that their money is going to RPGRIP1 if that's where they want it to go, or if it's going to one of the other, you know, things, programs or things like that. So yes, the short answer is yes, it is like GoFundMe, but more streamlined.
And I think, Heather, it's important to comment. So I think this was in response to, we originally had put together resources that were around Odylia and around fundraising for Odylia, but we've heard from some of the families that you'd rather see things that are more specific, which totally makes sense. I mean, honestly, with Gavin, he's in his community, he knows the community members, they know Freya, they really connect with Freya and their family. And so this resonates. And so he wants something that kind of brought those two things together. So we're trying to make it easy and put together tools that you can use dependent upon where you want to do fundraising or how you want to connect with people. Because sometimes it's not always just about asking for money. Like Heather said, it's about finding who in your network. And sometimes that can be someone you directly know, somebody, maybe it's somebody who someone else knows. So just being able to pass on information in a way that works for how you communicate with your network is really important. So let us know if you see something on our resource page, which I think, Heather, you're going to follow up with a few links, and that might be one of them. If there's something that's working, great. If there's something missing, let us know. Or if there's something that you think would be better if it was tweaked in a certain way, let us know as well.
The other thing that we heard from different people in the community is that they wanted the people that they're talking to and donors to feel like we're an authentic organization. And so that is another reason why we wanted to set this up, that it's where it shows that we're an approved 501c3. And it, you know, with GoFundMe, there was some question of, does it actually, GoFundMe or other entities, is it actually coming to Odylia? And so we really wanted to be able to address that. And we heard from other donors or other volunteers that this helped. Their donors felt better when they came to the page and they saw Odylia and they knew that it was directly tied to us. So that is another great thing about this every.org, is that, you know, people can feel better about making the gift, that it's actually going to what we say it's going to go for, which is important. And does anybody have any other questions about that?
I guess the question is, like, if people are interested, should they email you? Should they email the info account? How would you like them to contact you? Or what would be the best way for people to contact you and help get that set up?
You can definitely just, if you email me directly, then I can email, we can get it set up. And my email address is hgreen, so HGREENE at odylia.org. Somebody will probably drop that in the chat. Thank you, Catherine. And we can get the page set up or the flyer set up, and it's easy to send out a link from there.
So we will put instructions also on the website to make this easier to find. And I think we'll have one explicitly on the RPGRIP1 page in the next few days. In case you want to have a look at this in the meantime, definitely reach out to Heather. I think the every.org link that's also a difficult place to find right now. We're going to switch that around and make it easier to find. That I trialed myself as well, and it's pretty easy to set up a page. If you go to our resources page, there's also the template buried all the way down here. We'll pull this out, but this will allow you to download a template. But honestly, until we get this in a place that's more easily findable, just reach out and we can help you get this set up quickly. But have also a look at this page. This is a lot of background information that might be helpful if you're finding that people in your network just want more information. There might be some of that here, and easily usable.
So we have a question about what effect would it have on clinical trials or overall fundraising needs if donors designate their gifts?
No implication. So it's important to distinguish. Okay, so there's two things, and not exactly what this question was asking, but we do get questions from folks asking if they donate, if they or their loved one can be in a clinical trial. So we in no way can tie donations to clinical trial participation, and we have to be really, really clear about that. That's based on ethics standards. That being said, if you donate and you designate that in honor of somebody, that will not in any way hurt their chances of clinical trial participation. These are separate processes, and be very clear. Donations in no way influence participation.
But designating money for the RPGRIP1 program means that any funds will be used for the RPGRIP1 program. So that $2 million that I mentioned, anything designated for RPGRIP1, and then, other things that donations sometimes get used for the RPGRIP1 program, because we want to ensure that it continues to move ahead, and we'd love for it to continue at as fast as it possibly can. And in order to do that, we have to obviously have the funds raised. But even if they're not raised, then it'll just maybe slow down that timeline. So let's say we don't get to 2 million until later on. Well, then, that would slow down the timeline, but it would not stop the timeline. So anything designated would go towards that program. If it's raised in 2023 and it's used in 2024, it would be still RPGRIP1. That makes sense. Another recommendation that we had that was great from the last meeting was a video. I know a lot of people are very visual, and so we are putting the final touches, we hope, on an explainer video about Odylia. We felt like it was important to be able to explain to people what Odylia is and what we do, and then beyond that to explain RPGRIP1. And so that first step is in process and almost done. And we are trying to figure out how we can incorporate patient stories or patient videos into a video about RPGRIP1 after that. But we feel like we can figure out ways to help you get out videos if you have them of your patient or your loved one or family member that you would like to share. Some of that is how comfortable you are sharing your own patient's information online. So the video we hope to be able to share with y'all to use and send out in a few weeks. And then also with the every.org page, we can put more than one photo up, so that's another way that you can make it more personal for your family member or patient as well. So those are kind of in response to some of the questions that we got last time. I hope I did that answer that.
Yeah.
I jumped ahead, Catherine. What's the next? What have I missed?
I think we got a lot of them. People bring up, different kind of events, like a charity event, or what kind of an event can people put on? Do you have any ideas for that, or what people can do?
We did, we've looked into several, and because we're the community is very spread out. There's not a critical mass of people in one particular place to kind of volunteer together to organize an event. But anyone can organize an event in their community, and we're certainly can offer some advice and support of that. We have recently gotten a lot of questions and actually some feedback from some folks on the phone. Thank you for that, about marathons and other big runs. So in some of the marathons, we'll give a charity like us a free entry, and then the person running can use that as can say, I'm running this particular marathon and I'm raising $2,500 or whatever amount for the RPGRIP1 program. And so it's sort of, that's what they're doing as their fundraising event. And so there has been some interest in that. And if you are a runner and are interested in trying to figure out with a marathon, if that will work for you, that is an event that, those happen all over the world. So that is one event that we have talked about. But as far as events in your individual community, that's kind of would be based on if you know folks and who could help you plan something in your particular area.
It might be helpful to also comment on some of the funding that we're trying to identify. So we are working on applying for grants. There is the Foundation Fighting Blindness TRAP grant award coming up, which we applied for 2 years ago. And although we're ranked highly, we unfortunately weren't selected for funding. So we're going to reapply and put that application in and hope for the best. And there's a few other potential grants that we're looking at, but it's always a game of chance. Our program usually ranks pretty highly with reviewers of those grants. But there's usually tough decisions that are made on who to fund, especially in the rare disease space. So fundraising is such an important part of supporting this program, and anything you can do to help is fabulous. Anyone you can introduce us to, we're happy to talk to them and see if this is a program they'd be interested in supporting, if they want to learn more about Odylia. Feel free to come with ideas as well. This is, I think, an innovative, free-thinking community that has come to us with some great ideas. And I think we can work with you. Some of those are really easy to implement in short term, some are longer term, and we're working on. So feel free to throw out ideas whenever you have them. I think the video idea is one that we think has legs. We just need to figure out how much interest there is across the community and how best to pull that together. So let us know if you're interested. And if there's other ideas that we haven't talked about, please reach out. We're always willing to start a conversation and see if it's something we can kind of take the next step on. All right.
I think that's all we have for our questions from before. And I know we're kind of coming up on time, but if anyone has additional questions, feel free to ask them now or send us an email. Continue to reach out to us. We really enjoy getting to interact with all of you, and thanks for joining.
Thank you everyone for taking the time. And yes, please follow up. We'll be doing this more regularly, so let us know if there's a different format. Any feedback would be helpful for us to figure out going forward how frequently also to have and hold these Q&A sessions. So hopefully it helped, and look forward to seeing you in the near future.